Greetings, dear viewer. Welcome back to the Twisted Nightmare Studio. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about some of my absolute favorite co-op games. Some of these games are split screen, or shared screen experience. Others require my wife to have a separate system and television. As you may know, most of my time experiencing co-op is done with my wife, and we have played every single game on this list together. The rest of my co-op experience, rare as it is through online connection from time to time, though nobody I've made a solid friendship out of. Played many games that were cooperative over the years, it was hard to narrow it down to just the top 10. I did my best, and while there are many games out there to contend with, these are my personal favorites. Let me know what your favorite co-op games are in the comments. Hey, list me your top 5 if you want. Also, a few qualifiers. If the game has a franchise where it's basically the same games, I will count the entire franchise as one. Also, I won't put more than one game from any developer in my top 10 as some developers literally specialize in co-op experiences. And to get it started, as always, here are a few honorable mentions. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Shredder's Revenge. While this game is far from my favorite, it was fun enough to play with my wife to kill a few hours. I know that she liked it much more than I did. That being said, the combat feels good, but the enemies are more difficult to learn than in something like Streets of Rage. Also, you can have up to 6 players at one time, and that is just too crowded on the screen for me. There's too much going on to be able to focus. The graphics are definitely harkened back to a more simple arcadey time, and for that alone, it hits me in the nostalgia. I love that you can play as multiple different characters, and each character levels up at their own pace depending on how often you use them. To start out with, there are 6 characters unlocked from the beginning. Naturally, you have the Ninja Turtles, Leonardo, Michelangelo, Raphael, and Donatello, but you can also play as the badass April O'Neil, who looks like she always has before getting changed for
modern audiences.
What the hell is even that?
and as Splinter, which is definitely a welcome addition I hadn't expected. This game is a definite recommend if you are a Ninja Turtles fan. A Way Out. After playing It Takes Two, 2021's Game of the Year, and Hazelight Studios' most recent game, my wife and I decided to try the last game they released. This was A Way Out. It is a split-screen co-op game. Like It Takes Two, you have to have 2 players. You can simply not play it by yourself. It introduces different mechanics as the game goes on. You play as one of 2 men and go from a prison break to escapees that stick together to elude the authorities. The story is fairly predictable and isn't nearly as creative as its predecessor. The gameplay is also not nearly as interesting. The one thing I hate to say about this game is by the end, the story was the only thing keeping me invested because the gameplay leaves me bored. This game looks drab and uninteresting to look at. Now you may think that I didn't like this game, and that's not true. It just wasn't as good as the first game we'd played, and we were both a little bit let down. I would recommend this game at discount price, or if you're a super fan of playing with somebody else. Elden Ring. Now some might be surprised seeing any From Software on this list ranking so low, but I have to be honest. When it comes to these games, co-op is a tedious affair. I'm not afraid to admit that they literally could have changed how co-op works by making it so that the only time you leave is when the host of fingers boots you out or you decide to leave on your own. Instead, after every single boss, or if you want to go dungeon crawling, you have to leave the game, find that specific dungeon in your own world, and prepare to be summoned there. Anyone who watches my stuff knows that I am nearly obsessed with all things From Software, but the one thing that I will never be able to excuse is how the co-op is simply not optimized as well as it could be. Why can we not stay in the world as a summon? I understand that there are story implications, but how is it that you can make such a magnificent open world, and yet to experience it with my wife, I have to farm a flower, craft the ability to be summoned, and as we move on, I have to keep up with her in my own world in order for her to be able to summon me. And even then, we had to find out where summoning was available after beating a boss, which was a chore and a headache. Obviously, if you've watched my From Software ranking, then you know that I love this game. But at the same time, I am allowed to admit that it has flaws. 2 things can't be true at once. I can love this and recognize it has flaws. I've never been the type of person to blindly love a product and be unable to say, hey, I don't like this. This game is one of my favorites, but even I can admit that Miyazaki needs to change how summoning works in his game so we don't have to look up a guide. Now, with those honorable mentions out of the way, let's twist our way through this top 10. Number 10. Overcooked 2. This goofy little game came out of nowhere, and me and my wife had a blast with it. We weren't good at playing it, and we knew it, but we still had fun, even if sometimes I went basically all Gordon Ramsay, "What are you doing, you donkey?" on her sometimes. It was a blast to play. As the levels progress, they throw in different obstacles that you were meant to overcome. I can tell you that if a health inspector showed up at our place, he'd freak out about all the food that hits the floor and still ends up being served. I love cooking and have worked in restaurants on and off my entire life, and Overcooked simulates what it's like in that very hectic industry very well, even if it does add a few obstacles that I'd never have encountered in my day to day. Number 9. Lego Star Wars The Skywalker Saga. I'll be the first to say that I've never really gotten into Legos. They weren't something I got as a kid, so I didn't grow up with them. So when games started coming out, I thought, oh, how cute. Kids might enjoy playing that. And I went on to purchase my T and M rated games. While I take issue with Disney and how they've handled Star Wars, this game actually had me interested. The Lego games that I've seen, generally speaking, didn't have dialogue. Everything was expected to be understood through pantomime. When I found out that this was fully voiced and was basically a parody of Star Wars while being basically faithful to Star Wars, playing with my wife, who doesn't know the first thing about Star Wars, was a bit interesting. I decided to play each game and then watch the movies with her. We haven't gotten far, what with the twins coming into the world, but eventually we will get through all the games and thus the movies. It'll be interesting to see a layman's opinion as opposed to a fan. Number 8. Cuphead. This game has become known as the
Gaming Journalist Destroyer.
and I find it to be absolutely hilarious. It proves that that guy shouldn't have been playing games because very early in my relationship with my wife, I introduced her to Cuphead. And I let her, a non-gamer until I showed up, do this tutorial without my help, and even she figured it out. Sorry, I find that funny. But the truth be told, this game is amazing. The gameplay is solid, though I am far from good at it. And the old style cartoony animation is a creative twist that made me love it. I have yet to beat this game, and sometimes I doubt that I ever will, but it is a fun time with challenging run and gun levels mixed with boss battles that are the main highlight. Cuphead is easily worth a buy. Number 7. Hellpoint. That's right, the game that made it into my top 5 Souls-likes is also on my top co-op list. For all the Souls-likes out there, Hellpoint remains the only one that I'm aware of that allows split-screen co-op. This is Sci-Fi Souls, and while I'll admit that it's a little bit clunky, it is still an honest effort with unique enemies, a story that is like Souls, not spelled out to you in any way, and unfortunately, somehow I doubt I'm going to have Vatavidia to help me figure it out. You are a clone. Go figure out the rest. The game has different mechanics, like having to get an exosuit in order to walk out in space. This makes perfect sense, but finding those little buggers is a pain in the behind. Thank goodness for YouTube. I haven't beaten this yet, mostly because I'm confused as to where to go. I know that I'll eventually give in and watch something that'll show me, but sometimes I'm a bit stubborn. While the game is far from perfect, it is the first Souls-like that I experimented with, and I love the science fiction setting. It will definitely come down to preference, but I would recommend this for all those who love a couch co-op. Number 6. The Gears of War franchise. These games, I feel, don't need much of an introduction. If you owned an Xbox in the last 15 years, then you know about this franchise. And if you've been paying attention to games, you probably still know about it, even if you don't have an Xbox. I have found that my biggest issue with this game is the lack of iteration. By the time that I got through Gears of War 1, 2, 3, and Judgment, I felt like I'd played the same game 4 times with different stories. While I've yet to play the 4th and 5th game, my wife and I are working our way through these games, with another franchise that's next up on my list as well. The story is fairly interesting, and I've even read one of the books. John DiMaggio gives an iconic performance as Marcus Phoenix. I don't know how he does it without constant supply of cough drops. Maybe once I get into Gears 4, it will be different enough to make me fall back in love with this franchise. But for right now, I can tell you that these games are fun, but the first 4 games definitely feel like they're the same. Number 5. The Halo franchise. Yet another game that doesn't need any introduction. Halo brings back memories of sitting next to my brothers and playing the first Halo game. Just the opening music fills me with nostalgia. It was actually amazing when I got Game Pass, playing the Master Chief Collection. When I played the first Halo game, I know I had to drive my wife insane by constantly switching during live gameplay between the remaster, which I've never seen before, and the original, which is what is burned in my memory. I am playing these games with my wife, and we've already beaten the first one and have dabbled our toes into the sequel. This franchise was once an amazing thing that millions of fans rejoiced. Now it seems a shell of its former self, but the Master Chief Collection is definitely worth a buy if you have an Xbox. Number 4. Streets of Rage 4. This game might come as a surprise to some people, but this was the first game that I platinumed and a game that I've spent hours upon hours enjoying with my wife. This is definitely a love letter to the original games. As a matter of fact, you can't even unlock the original characters from each game, and they look and move exactly the same as they did in those previous games. This gets a bit weird when you have 4 different versions of certain characters. They also have Root as an unlockable, if you remember who that is. There is plenty to get your money's worth. If you are a fan of the originals, this game will feel like riding a bike. Yes, there's the differences that are afforded by modern technology. Heck, if you play the game on Mania Plus, the number of enemies becomes downright staggering. The DLC also adds tons of value to it, but that's only for the ones who love this game and or are fans of the original. The story is, well, generic and corny, but I mean, it's a Streets of Rage game. What were you expecting? Number 3. The Borderlands games / Tiny Tina's Wonderland. Now this is multiple games in one, but these games are mostly played the same. Yes, Tiny Tina's has a bit of a variation, but these games feel very similar. You can play this split screen if you so choose. The stories are a bit out there. Most of the time you go up to a place, pick a mission description, read it, finish, and go and get paid. Sure, there is a main story, and it's okay, but I've never found the stories to be too thrilling. Some of the characters are, well, awesome, like Handsome Jack, an interesting guy who even got his own collection, which I have. However, then there's things like Claptrap, which just needs to shut its claptrap and disappear. Yes, I know he's a mascot for the series, and yes, in every single game I empty an entire mag into him, just hoping against hope that one day I'll be able to destroy him, but they never let me. Oh, it's so annoying. Yes, I know that most like him. I find him to be an irritating and probably the weakest character in the first few games. Borderlands 3 is another story. These games are looter shooters at their best. Lots of different types of guns to get nice and confused about as you try them out, trade them in, and then find out what's just picked up a better gun 25 minutes later. So you're looking through your inventory once again to figure out which one's the best and which ones you need to get rid of. That's when your backpack isn't full. If you like looter shooters, you've probably already played this, so you already know. And for those of you who have been living under a rock, or have played the part of an ostrich with your head in the sand, these games are fairly cheap, and they also have Borderlands 2 for the VR. I don't think you can play that with co-op, though. I haven't tried it yet. Number 2. Remnant from the Ashes. This Souls-like, which is definitely my favorite, is a third-person shooter with a randomly generated world. There's a template, and then you have to find the different areas and different bosses. Some people will get Shroud, who is a pain in the neck because he simply just teleports everywhere, shooting you with arrows, blasting beams, and of course having ads come at you. Or you might encounter Gorefist, who has abs that are basically gas bags that run you down and blast in front of your face, while he basically stalks you from behind, and he's rather large and hard. The difficulty disparity is actually rather amazing, and there's several of those going throughout. For most Souls-likes and Souls games, when they have additional enemies for the bosses, I tend to think that it's just making up for a bad design, and it's just a way to hide the flaws by throwing enough to distract you. And at first, I did think that that was a problem with these bosses. But, honestly, once you build up a character and have mods, you can melt through the enemies with relative ease. So, those enemies don't actually matter as much. And even when you're traveling through the swamp and you run into Shrek, it gives you an option to go downstairs. If you do this, it actually makes it a one-on-one fight instead of it being him, the ads, the walls, and the camera versus you. This game is fun, and the mechanics are very solid. I absolutely cannot wait until the sequel comes out this summer. If you like well-done third-person shooters and Souls-like games, this is one to check out. Number 1. It Takes Two. That's right, Hazelight's 2021 Game of the Year is absolutely amazing. There are so many different mechanics that they developed into the game. Each single chapter has a new gimmick that keeps it fresh. The stories are one about family and rediscovering your passion. The graphics are a bit cartoony, but for this universe it works, and I think it was intentional. This game was a blast from beginning to end and has amazing replay value, as playing as the other character is definitely going to be a different experience, as the gimmicks work well together but are very different. As of writing this, I've only beaten it twice as Cody, the male character, but his wife May is one playthrough I haven't got. The game is an amazing experience, and it earned the Game of the Year slot by right. Congratulations Hazelight for making an amazing game. So that's my list. What did you think? Did I list any of your favorite co-op games? What are your favorites? Were there any that you think that was just criminal that I didn't mention? Or is my list just plain wrong, and like Jon Snow, I still know nothing? Is that still a reference we can make these days? I never actually watched Game of Thrones. Let me know in the comments. Please like, subscribe, and thank you for visiting the Twisted Nightmare Studio.